ever heard the term codependency or let's see, maybe perfectionism? Well, today you're in for a treat because I have an author on the show who wrote a book called Raising Empowered Children, The Codependent Perfectionist Guide to Parenting. Oh, and yes, this book is as good as it seems. And yes, she is amazing as she sounds. I loved our conversation. Alana Carvalho is a licensed mental health counselor who focuses on helping parents, couples, and individuals build balanced, connected, and rewarding relationships. She is especially passionate about helping individuals see how healing codependency and perfectionism can lead to a more joy-filled life. What a great guest for the Love Your Life show, because I know for myself, when I look and I help heal some of my codependency and perfectionism, I am more able to live a life I love. Alana has lectured on child development at the College of Staten Island. Her first book that I've mentioned, Raising Empowered Children, The Codependent Perfectionist Guide to Parenting, is available in the show notes and on Amazon. She has also created an awesome, super cool resource. It's the Codependent Perfectionist Oracle cards that I will also put in the show notes. It gives everyone the ability to use therapeutic tools just every day or whenever you want, not being perfectionist about it, but whenever you want. And so Alana is on the show today. I am so psyched to bring her to you. Make sure you click back on the show notes so you can follow her on Instagram and check out all the amazing information and goodness that she puts out in this world to help us all live lives we love. So let's welcome Alana to the show. And hello and welcome to the Love Your Life show, Alana. We're so glad that you're here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Thank you. Well, I'm excited to bring your message to listeners because I have your book in the background, but I've been following you for a while on Instagram. And I got to say that the title, Raising Empowered Children, is something that I've always, I'm a mom of 5 myself. So yes, I want to raise empowered children. But the subtitle of the Codependent Perfectionist Guide to Parenting was the one that when I heard of it, I was like, oh my goodness, I'm feeling a little naked here. So what got you into writing a book that helps codependent perfectionists, if you wouldn't mind telling us?
Well, to be honest, I started my own therapeutic journey quite some time ago. And that's when I recognized that I was dealing with both codependency and perfectionism. And I also happened to, of course, at the same time, I was working with parents with children who had substance abuse and mental health issues. And it was just like, there it is, if it's like, this is what I need to talk about, because I was seeing the overlap of both my own personal issues and then what was going on for these parents with their children. And I was like, oh, wow, like if we could tackle this, particularly, so many of the parents would say like, oh God, I wish I knew this information so many years ago. And I was like, that's what we got to do. We got to talk about it,
I really appreciate that, because that is something that is really helpful and comes up a lot for listeners and my clients. And that's like, why do I care if I'm codependent or if I, am perfectionist? And you care because it doesn't feel good. Is where I like it. It's not something we strive for. That it might, in the moment, we might get like a hit of, oh wow, I'm helpful, but overall, it is stressful. So with that as a backdrop, could you paint a picture of what a codependent perfectionist does, or what they act like, or one or the other, or wherever you want to go?
Well, I think how it manifests can look so different. Like, with these particular parents, it was coming out in this like obsessive need to try to fix their children and what they were going through. And, of course, every parent would be struggling with their kid going through something difficult. But the codependency piece kind of comes in when it's like, I need to make sure they're okay. I need to fix them kind of feeling, or when parents are just really overstepping when, they're trying to be, helpful, of course, but then they cross the line where they're doing too much and they're not allowing their child, and sometimes it's even adult children, to step up and kind of step into their own lives, right? You also see it coming out just in little ways of how we speak to our kids, or how much we do for them. The traditional codependent parent is like the helicopter parent who's kind of like, oh my God, my kid's struggling, I got to do something about it, and swoops right in, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the perfectionistic parent is the one who's really focusing on like the outcome of things, right? Like, how good is my kid doing in school? How well are they doing at their sports? Whatever their kind of focus is, it's like they want to make sure their kid is like doing well at things or
Mm.
accomplishing things, um, perhaps at the expense of maybe building up their internal self.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and also losing sight of what's best for the kid.
Right.
That I see that a lot. I have lots of parents whose kids are sort of 10 and older. I have parents with kids who are younger too, but this idea that like they need to be a quote unquote responsible parent by making sure that their kid does XYZ so they get into college, or so that they like, and if they don't, then they're not being helpful or a good or a responsible parent, but losing sight of the kid. Like, does the kid want to be doing these types of things?
Right. And that really is the commonality between both perfectionism and codependency, is that it's actually really more about me than it is about anybody else, right? It's not
Mm,
actually about my kid. It's my issues that are coming up. It's my emotions. It's my struggles. And I won't recognize it when I'm in it, that I'm just kind of projecting it onto whatever relationship that may be. In this
mhm.
case, it's parenting.
Yeah, can you say a little more about that, about how like a parent might see that it's their issue?
Oh gosh, that's so tough. Like, because it is hard for us to see it. But what I like to tell parents to do, and this really, again, this goes for all relationships, but is to really try to observe yourself. You
Mm,
know, even sometimes, I'll watch my kids struggling and I'll feel myself like wanting to just get the thing for them, or, just tell them the answer. And then I stop myself because I know it's about me and
mhm,
my discomfort, right? And that's really what I would want anyone listening to be thinking about, like, to really just watch themselves when their child is going through it could be a minor struggle to something really big, and watch what's going on internally,
mhm,
feeling into it, seeing like, what am I feeling right now? Even
mm,
if your kid comes home and they're like, oh my God, I had this horrible day, and they start telling you about it, what are your emotions about that?
mhm,
Do you
mhm,
suddenly now have a bad day? Are you now
mhm,
stuck in the situation, whatever that may be, right? That's when you know it's about you and not
mhm.
really about your kid.
Oh, and it's so helpful. And just you bringing this up reminds me of like my own discomfort when my kids were younger and they were putting together a Lego set or doing a
Right.
puzzle. And
Right.
I'm there and I'm like, this is the piece. Like,
Right.
shove
Exactly.
it in. And sometimes I would shove it in, and
Totally.
that's more about me. Like they're there, they're struggling, they're having a normal
Right.
human experience, which is part, we can see that them learning how to do the puzzle by themselves is helpful. But then you fast forward 10 years and they come home with a bad grade, or one of their friends didn't let them sit next to them on the bus. And you're like, you got the phone in your hand to call the friend's mom or
Right.
the teacher. It's
Yes.
like, same
Yes.
thing. This is the puzzle.
Exactly. Yes, exactly. And that's the thing, when you can see it that way, it's really helpful, because we tend to minimize those earlier experiences, but really they're just the build up to that later experience where there's a bigger thing going on, and we still can't sit with that discomfort, you
Mm-hmm.
know?
Yeah. So how do you help parents sit with that discomfort?
It's tough. It really is. But I really push my parents to take a step back and help. Really, part of it is truly about communication, because I think a lot of the parents, and they weren't taught it themselves, but is to really just communicate clearly with their kids. So a lot of times what I'll have them do, particularly with like the teens and or the tweens and the young adults as well, is asking, do you want help with this?
Mm-hmm.
And even with the little ones, that's so important. Like,
Mm-hmm.
it's just like one question and it's so minor, but if you ask the question, it actually allows the other person to say yes or no.
Mm-hmm.
And with that, why that's really important to me is that I want kids to like kind of learn how to speak up and say like, yes, I do want help, or
Mm-hmm.
no, I don't want help right now. And I don't need your feedback. And then I tell my parents, once they say it, you
put
zipper
the
that
muzzle on.
mouth, right? Yes.
Right.
No, because they gave you the answer. And so
Mhm.
you have to respect then where they're at. And it
Mhm.
doesn't mean, like if a couple days later you see them still struggling, you can't come back and say, hey, I see you're still struggling.
Mhm.
I just want to check in and see if you still didn't want any help on that. Right. But
Mhm.
again, you're still asking and allowing your child to kind of show you the way with it
Mhm.
rather than, oh, you're struggling. Let me tell you the answer, or let me tell you my feedback on it.
Because I'm so uncomfortable to see you
Right.
struggling.
Right.
What you're saying is so helpful. And I use this in my marriage too. I'm married to a coach. So we're both coaches. And we often we have to stop and be like, do you want help with this? Or do you want me to
Right.
just listen? And
Right.
and with my kids, that has become second nature too, to say like, okay, so I'm hearing you say that you're stressed because it's midterms and you feel like you're going to fail all your classes. Like,
Right.
do you want help here? Do you want my advice, or do you want me to just listen? And I will say that not even 9 times out of 10, it's like 98 times out of 100. My kids are like, I do not want your help. Thank you. I mean, they just want me to be there and let them have their emotions, a safe place for them to
Right.
freak out. Whereas, in the middle of their chemistry class, not so much, or maybe in front of their peer group.
I don't think even as a society, I'll say that we honor how helpful and important it is to just witness and listen to somebody else's experience, right? Like
Mhm.
what your kids are saying is like, actually, it's so much more important if you just hear me out right now. And
Mhm.
we don't really know how to do that a lot of times, right? So
Mhm.
one of the other things that I often help parents with is actually learning how to listen, which most people don't know how to do. It's actually a skill, to be honest.
Mhm.
And it's something you have to develop because instead we're kind of taught like when we have conversations, like one person says something and then we respond to it, like
Mm.
with either like telling the same story or our feedback to it or whatever it is, right? True listening isn't doing that. True listening is actually showing the other person that we heard what they said.
Mm.
And that's a really hard thing to do. We
Mm.
again, it requires us to kind of contain ourselves
Mhm.
and put aside like what I want to say. Like I want to say, yeah, when I was 15, I had the same thing.
Oh yeah,
Stop.
they're like, Mom, that was so long ago.
Right. Exactly. Right.
I don't think you were ever 15. Right. Unhelpful.
Yeah, it's just so not helpful.
Yeah.
Right. They just
Mhm.
want to know that you heard them and that
Mm.
they were really received, actually.
Yeah, this is a great time to mention that you have a podcast, because I heard you speaking of this point on the podcast and just sort of reflecting back or mirroring back. Your kid comes home and he's like, I'm so stressed in science. And you're like, oh, I hear that you're stressed in science. They're like, yeah, the teacher's a pain in my butt. You're like, oh, okay, tell me more about the teacher. Like you're
Right.
just sort of throwing it back at them
Right.
in that tell me more, instead of what the codependency tendency is to fix it. Like, oh my God, you're stressed at science. Okay, let's have some ice cream and let's study, like let's throw it all at you.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I'll call the science teacher later.
I'll
And tell
call the
them
science teacher. I already actually have texted them and they know my home number.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, and you bring up an important part of this, just us not recognizing how the value of sitting with someone else's experience. And I do, you speak to this well in your book. And I do think that goes to our upbringing also, that we were not like emotions were not something that we're like, oh, sure, have an emotional reaction. It's more this like, oh my God, go to your room until, your smile, you turn that frown upside down or whatever.
Yes.
So then I just want to give parents and listeners compassion here for that, the discomfort that we physically feel when someone else is struggling, and to recognize that's okay. We're doing something different here. And it doesn't mean that we need to, abort and fix and all of that.
Right. And, for parents that tend to be on the more codependent side, they may feel like this is like abandoning of your child because they're not, doing all of the stuff that they're used to doing. And it can really bring up some really anxious feelings for parents. But I truly believe you're actually doing so much more for your child. You just don't realize it because it looks different, but it's a way more empowering way to help them. And it allows them to build their own skills, which is really essential for thriving later on in life, right?
Yeah, I really appreciate you bringing that, because I do have a lot of parents that feel like it's their responsibility, or they're being a bad mom or dad, or even in a relationship, like if their spouse is upset, they're being bad by not taking that on. So this is a great time to speak a little of how you see codependency, like codependent parenting or codependent relationships showing up for the kid. Like, how does it feel for the kid, or what are the effects for the kid who's in this?
So there's often there can be two really, main ways that it impacts them. One is a feeling of, I can't do this by myself, right? Like, I don't know how, because that's the message I keep being sent, right? And the other is, I need to take care of my parent and their feelings, right? And both of those are pretty like heavy for children, and I tend to work with, I work with parents, but I also work a lot with young adults. And I find that message really carries into the adulthood, right? And then there's this feeling of, I'm not capable, or, or I have to do the opposite of that happens too, or I have to do everything by myself because I can't ask for help, right? So it's like,
because it's going to take mom down, or it's going to,
right,
yeah.
And I should know, right? Particularly if I'm a perfectionist, particularly so, right? Like, I'm going to do it all myself, and I'm going to do it the best. And I have to, all of that stuff, right? It's like, we then take that on, and it comes with us and spreads out into our life in different ways, right? And so we tend to be really out of balance there.
Yeah, I see. So I had interviewed Julie Lethcott-Hames, author of How to Raise an Adult, earlier, and she was speaking to how this shows up in like the college age kid, the child, that first point you were making, where they just don't have that feeling that they can do it for themselves. So they, are walking across campus and their papers blow across. Well, before they pick up their papers, they're texting mom, what do I do? Or, oh my God, someone took my clothes from the washer and threw them on the ground. Instead of putting mom, what do I do? Like they don't have that ability to problem solve for themselves yet, because we have taught them that we need to be a part of that. So that's interesting, which brings up, I'd love for you to sort of touch on a little, because back to your part where you said the parents sometimes can feel like they're abandoning their child. If I'm taking sort of the teen or the young adult child and the codependent parent, I see the codependency showing up in both places. So either it's the teen or the young adult feeling anxious and like they can't handle it, and they need their mom to regulate, or their dad to regulate their emotions, or so they're doing the texting during the day, or they're doing the, call mom, if like mom's your first point of contact if something goes wrong. And then I also see the parent who is thinking they're being responsible. They hear from their kid, oh my God, my kid is stressed about the chemistry midterm. And so they send a text during the day, how'd chemistry go? Or how you doing with chemistry? Or how are your feelings? You speak a little about how that, because I think some people would see that as good parenting, or like, look at, like, the daughter really has a great relationship with the mom because she tells the mom everything.
Right. That for sure happens. And that's when I have to come in and like try to just like make some space here, I think, it's, to me, it kind of comes back to the communication piece again. And I think once you're in that situation, we have to kind of slowly move ourselves out of it and kind of wean both parties off of the experience, So I would not say drop your child like a hot potato, right? Because that's not actually loving either. But you want to kind of take some steps, and I did actually a podcast on adult children who are financially dependent on their parents, and it looks similar to that experience, in that it's like you start talking to them about it, right? And it's like, I realize that I'm creating dependency here, right? First, you need to take responsibility for what you've done in the relationship, right? And so I'm going to try to be different about how I go about, working with you on issues, or supporting you through struggles, or whatever it may be. And so if you see me being different, that's why, because I know that you are actually capable of handling this. And I haven't really given you the space for that. So I want to support you, but I'm going to help you learn how to also reach out for support yourself, or maybe scatter your support in different areas. So you don't feel like it's like mom has the answer, or dad knows what to do, or whatever it is. Right. And help them then with that by you showing it to them.
Well, that would also help break this perfectionist mold too, that look at that, I'm not perfect. I was mothering in a way that I thought was helpful for, right, or was modeled for me. And look at that. Now I learned a little differently, and I see how I'm setting you up with this message that you can't do it. Whereas I think you can. I want you to think.
And then, so I would start helping them once they then reach out to be thinking about, well, what do you think? How are you thinking about handling this? Oh, you want to reach out to this person? That sounds like a really good thing to do, and then start removing yourself from being part of the answer to things, or the fixing piece of it. Right.
Yeah. I guess that's where we're trying to get them to think for themselves, that we don't need to be sort of in their brain being the problem solver, that we want them to start to be the problem solver, the critical thinker. Right. And they can only do that if we let them.
I say to parents, there's no bad time to do this. Like it's never like too late. You can work on this at any point in your relationship with your child, even if they're a full grown adult. But if you happen to be a parent who has a younger child, start that now. Start asking them when they're struggling with the Legos or whatever it may be in that moment, like, how are you thinking about doing that? And helping them talk about how their mind's working and how they're thinking about something, and then showing them, oh, okay, you're thinking about putting that there. That's interesting, because I was thinking, if we put it a little bit over, it might fit in better. I don't know, just suggesting, but not like I'm there doing it, and allowing them to kind of come up with it first, and then helping them guide it through, right?
Yeah.
Appropriately.
Well, and I also love just like neutralizing mistakes or failures. It's like, oh, okay, that didn't work. What else can you try? Like, we don't have to make it like, oh my God, you asked the teacher? Wait a minute. It's like, okay, hold on. Let's back up. But that's sort of regulating piece and calming down. So what I'm hearing you say is, for the mom or the dad or the person who's in a codependent relationship or marriage, to start to step back in terms of some of the interactions, certainly with the parenting, and maybe if they're texting their college age kid every day, to start thinking that this, a different thought, that this actually is not a sign of your strong relationship. It's a sign of enmeshment, and maybe texting every other day and telling your daughter you're going to be texting less because you want her to know that you believe in her and she can do it and she doesn't need you, all of those things.
Absolutely. And again, like I said, just making sure that you're communicating it first, so that the person doesn't suddenly feel a distance from you and they don't have words for it, right? Like, we want to always put the words to whatever the change in behavior is, so it's not anxiety provoking or alarming for the other person.
That's really helpful. Yeah.
Because as codependents, a lot of times we could just not say something because it's uncomfortable. Like, I just want to do this and not say I'm doing it.
Right. Yeah. And then on the other side, they might be like, oh my God, mom's mad, she's not texting. And it's like, let's just remove that layer.
Right. We don't want to leave anything up for story making for the other person, and whatever the relationship is. It's like, we want to speak to it and share what's going on for us, so it's very clear. And they're like, oh, okay, well, that's what they're doing. Whether I like it or not is a different story, but at least I understand why they're doing it. Right.
Yeah. Could you speak a little more about how perfectionism shows up as a parent or as a woman in this society? Because it is something that until reading your book, I think I thought, oh, I'm not a perfectionist. Like, look at, I can leave my laundry around and I can, but when it got into my definition of sort of being a good mom or a bad mom or a good wife or a bad dad, I was like, oh, ding, ding, ding.
Right. And it's so true. It even reminds me, like, I had a client who used to say to me all the time, Alana, I'm not a perfectionist. My room is a mess. You just don't see it, but like my home is a mess. And I'm like, it's not about that. We have such a traditional way of seeing it. And I understand why, but really what you just said is more what it's about, which is like this binary type of thinking where I'm either like, I had a good day or I had a bad day. I accomplished something and that makes me good at it, or I didn't, and then I'm bad at it. Am I a good parent today? Am I a bad parent today? All of that type of thinking is what perfectionism is about. And generally speaking, it's often that we're holding ourselves, and it doesn't have to be in every area of life, but it can be in one or multiple areas, to unrealistic standards. And not allowing ourselves to just be human, make mistakes, be less than perfect in some area of our life, and know that that doesn't actually define whether we're good or bad at something. And not, so it's not like it's really removing the sense of worth that we put on some external thing in our life, right? And that's really important because it really impacts how we feel about ourselves,
For sure. And I'm noticing, as a kid, I think I was raised with like, this disconnection from that. I knew what was right. I mean, I was raised in a codependent household, and someone else knew what was right. So I always needed to look for someone else. And so it was, the message I got was like, Susie's way is the wrong way. So we better make sure, that we learn the right way. And this, as you're saying, like this binary, and I think it just rears its head in parenting because, I would argue, like, what more important job do we have? We bring these individuals into the world, whether it's adoption or birth or whatever, but like, then we, at the beginning, are responsible for keeping them alive. And then, moving through that and trying to separate out and not be in that enmeshment of codependency, but move away while also having what you're talking about, this flexibility of thinking of some days I'm gonna, really use some skillful parenting tools, and other days it's like, oh wow, look at that.
Right. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yes. And when we can kind of have compassion for ourselves with that, to me, that it's such good modeling for our kids, because they're having the same experience. Some days they're really good at holding in some outbursts, and some days they're not, and they need to let it out. And it's like, okay, that's where you're at today. There's actually, and I write about this, that there's evidence that the best parenting is actually being the good enough parent rather than an amazing parent, and most of us, if we just took a step back, are probably good enough parents. And that's actually ideal for our children. When we're being what maybe people think of as this amazing parent, we're probably overly attending to our children's needs. And that's the codependent piece. It's like, we're on top of them. We're trying to mind read what they need all the time. We're constantly trying to take care of things and make everything perfect. And honestly, that's not really helpful, even when they're very young. We want to attend to our children, but not in a way that's stifling. And it's like, oh my God, my kid's crying. Okay, let me get them. And then we run, and there's like this anxious energy about it, rather than like, okay, I see that they're crying. Let me put this down, and then I'll go over, I wonder if they're hungry, and it's just a very different energy about it, which our kids feel from us.
Oh, right? Yeah.
And if you can and of course, none of us can be in that more zenful place all the time, but if we can try to not be so attached to whatever is going on around us, we have a way better chance at really being exactly what those of us around us need in any given moment.
Yeah, well, and I really appreciate that you bring that to attention, because for me, it's all about like me releasing codependency, and perfectionism is all about me releasing this thought that I am the only one responsible for their happiness. Like if they're stressed about chemistry, I've done something wrong, or they're stressed about, someone on the playground in 4th grade, like then I should have prepared them better. Or somehow I have this all encompassing specter of influence and yeah, but when I can relax from that and be in that calmer place, like, okay, they're crying, maybe they're not crying, to not link it immediately to me, that I did something wrong or I'm a bad mom.
And then actually it's okay to cry, and it's really just their way of communicating to us that they need something or something's going on for them, right? So that's not, it's not like an alarm or a crisis, it's just a communication, and then we can go over and attend to it, right? The same goes on for our kids. I mean, I truly believe that whatever our kids are going to, and I'm like a spiritually based therapist, like, but I believe that whatever our kids are going through, that's important for their journey, perhaps ours as well in a different way, but when we kind of jump in, we take away the experience that perhaps is important for them for whatever reason that we don't have to know the answer to. And that to me is really important, because when I can separate and I say, oh wow, my child is going through that it seems like that's an important part of her journey. I don't know what that's about, and it's really not my job to figure it out, but it is my job to know that for some reason she's going through this and it's important for her. And then I can kind of, instead of being like, oh my God, she can't go through this, or this is terrible, then I can at least have some breathing room to say, okay, and so what does that mean for me as the person who's here, like helping guide her? Does that mean that I am just, maybe I'm just meant to be a comfort? Maybe I'm meant to be a sounding board. I don't know what it is, but I don't have to be so ready to fix it then in that moment.
Yeah, well, you just said, I love the word guide. You said, I'm here to, or how can I guide her, or how can I support her, or how can it really is moving away from that like dictator authoritarian, but also that like, this faith parenting. I like thinking of like, am I parenting from faith or am I parenting from fear? And this belief that things work out for them. And this, I'm always saying like, this is part of their journey. This must be what they need to become strong, young, capable person that they will be. And that gives me some of that space to take a breath and not make things so personal about me. Yeah.
And if you can think about that, even, if you have that kind of awareness for yourself of your own experiences and how important they were for you, for whatever your story is about, it can help you really see it for them much more clearly. And you can get that, through your own reflection or through therapy or whatever it may be. But it's really helpful information to have.
For sure. Yeah. I'm often reminding myself of that. Like one of my favorite feelings to feel is pride. And when I think of times when I have felt pride, it has come after a moment of discomfort or, strife or like something, that I have moved through an uncomfortable moment to get. And whenever I am sort of circumventing my child's experience of moving through that discomfort, and I'm removing their opportunity for pride. And that it's like, wait a minute, maybe they can feel a little discomfort that this kid didn't let him sit next to them on the, school bus, or this is not mine to fix.
Yeah, absolutely.
Interesting. So how do you get parents to start stepping back or to maybe lean more into this good enough parenting?
Well,
or where would they start?
Do it personally, I mean, I tend to be a little bit tough as a therapist. I call my people out. I say, you got to look at this. Look at what just happened right there, right? Your kid was struggling and you went into, okay, let me call 20 therapists and figure this out, right?
Fix it mode.
Like, stop, right?
Yeah.
So I do think, if you're struggling with this and you're really trying to bring awareness to it, like having a coach like yourself, or even a support group, or whatever it may be, a therapist who understands codependency and perfectionism, it's really important. Particularly, like I tend to like a style where people are direct and they're giving you feedback, so you could really look at what's going on and do the healing work around it.
I really appreciate that. And just this, I do hear from a lot of parents that they're like, oh my gosh, my kid is really struggling. Do you have a therapist for them? And you speak to this in the book about how important it is for us as adults to clean up our stuff and to witness it and just before sort of passing that down. And you also speak to why that it's hard for codependent perfectionists to ask for help? Could you speak a little more about that, or why that is?
Well, if you're a codependent perfectionist like myself, you think that you are not supposed to ask for help, right? So even going to therapy was like, oh God, even though I was, becoming a therapist myself, but it was
Yeah.
like, I'm supposed to have it all together,
Like
right?
you should know better, or you should be able to
Yeah.
do this on your own. Yeah.
And that's why for me, my therapist said this to me, and I really firmly believe it, that the brave people are the ones who go to therapy,
Mhm.
right? Like those of us who are willing to look at ourselves and say like, wow, I didn't do that well, or I need to work on this, or whatever it may be. It's like
Mhm.
you're brave for that, because most people are not willing to do that,
Mm-mm.
in this life. And so um willingness to do that, I think, is just a huge part of the healing journey.
Mhm.
Being willing to hold yourself accountable, be seen by other people, be vulnerable.
Mhm.
It's really essential to be working on some of these things.
Mhm. It is. I give people listening to the show, alone credit, because, that in itself is just this awareness that like codependency is a thing, or perfectionism, as I'm saying, it's like, yeah, I'm okay not, try folding all my underwear. It's like, but when it comes to like my judgment of myself around a mother, it's like, oh, you got something there.
Right.
And it is this, it's that open-minded, like, let me look, and this, like, it's okay, we're human. And that starting with that path is really helpful. I appreciate you bringing that up.
Yeah, I think, for us, every time a codependent says to me, well, how can I get this person to work on themselves? I say, well, besides the fact that you can't, but the best way that you can actually is by doing it yourself and
Hmm.
showing it to them. And
Hmm.
when you can show it to somebody else, wow, is that impactful,
Hmm.
right?
So impactful. And also when you're not modeling this, I actually have a sign in my house. It says the dysfunction stops here, because it is that, like, we're done.
Yeah,
Like, you are
right.
not responsible for my feelings, kids. Like, if mom's sad because you didn't, whatever, like, you're a middle schooler and you want to spend more time in your room, and I'm down there like, oh, I thought we were going to do with the coloring book, like,
Right.
I can manage my own emotions. I know.
Right.
You do
Right.
you need alone time. That it really is in that modeling, and then not saying something, but I've been alone all day. It's like, oh
Right.
my God.
Yep. Not about me. Yep.
Mhm. Yeah. Well, listeners, I do need to say that, like, your book, I love how in here that you have, at the end of chapters, you have these reflective exercises. So if they're looking for a place to get started and reaching out to a coach or a therapist is a bit too much, grab the book. The links will be in the show notes, because you have so many good questionnaires in here and reflection exercises and pieces, so people absolutely can get started and start having conversations with the people they're in relationship with that are a little different.
Absolutely. Yeah. And you're absolutely right. Like, not everybody's ready to take the step of getting support in the way that I mentioned it, but I do hope that the book is a support in that way, wherever
Mhm.
you are in your journey.
Yeah, well, I would say get support, like, reach out for help. Like, that's part of the codependency or perfectionism, as you said, but as I know with myself, that I'm like, I should just be able to get a book and do it. And it's like, I can, like, I'm glad that you have this resource. And
Right.
if you want to do it faster, like, if you really want to get a coach or get a therapist, like, that stuff that you're telling yourself, it's like, as you said, you're going to be like, look at that. That's interesting. And we don't know what we don't know.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's there's a reason therapists and coaches do what they do. And
Mhm.
it's important to help bring awareness to yourself on something that otherwise you might be really blind to, which many of us are living our
Mhm.
lives, that there's nothing that's just normal, that we
It's
don't
mhm.
we don't see everything, right?
For sure. I mean, that's what I say all the time, is like, my parents didn't know. They weren't like, oh, let me raise Susie in a codependent manner, so she's going to have confidence issues when she gets older. Like, that was not their intent. They
Right.
don't know what they don't know. And once we know better, we can do better. So it's
Absolutely.
that, like, freedom there. Well, I will have links to everything in our show notes. Before we sign off, is there anything you want to leave listeners with, or any message you think we haven't covered, or?
I just want to thank everybody for listening, and, echo what you just said, Susie, that just even listening shows your willingness to
Mm.
work on yourself and bring awareness to something. And that to me is really incredible. In addition to the book, I also have what are called oracle cards, and they can be really helpful to give some relational guidance. So if you want to check those out, they're also on my website, which you can easily figure out, which is thecodependentperfectionist.com.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you so much for coming today. This is awesome.
Thank you for having me, Susie. It was wonderful.